The wind, a razor, flayed the skin from the world, leaving behind only the bleached bone of an endless white. Ilara huddled deeper into the crumbling embrace of what had once been a line shack, a forgotten relic swallowed by the vast, indifferent wilderness. Her arms, aching with the cold and the precious weight they cradled, drew the bundled infant closer. Finn. Her son. His breaths were shallow, like the last flutter of a trapped bird. She sang, a broken melody against the blizzard's roar, each note a tear shed from her soul. It was a lullaby of farewell, a final, desperate offering to a life flickering like a spent candle. The words caught in her throat, choked by a grief so profound it had no sound. This was it, the end of their flight, the culmination of scorn and stones and hollow-eyed judgment. Just the ice, the wind, and a mother's dying song for her dying baby. Then, a shadow loomed in the shack's dilapidated doorway, a figure carved from the storm itself, snow clinging to a wide-brimmed hat and a heavy, animal-hide coat. He was a mountain of a man, his face weathered by sun and frost, eyes the color of winter twilight. A lone cowboy, materializing from the white chaos like a spirit of the storm. He said nothing, simply stood there, the blizzard howling around his silhouette. Ilara clutched Finn tighter, a feral protectiveness surging through her despair. There were no words left in her, only the primal instinct to shield her child, even in death. The man's gaze fell from her face to the small, still bundle in her arms. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his eyes, too quick to name. Then, with a gruff, almost imperceptible nod, he stepped fully inside, the wind momentarily shrieking through the widened gap before he pushed the rotted door mostly shut. He moved with a quiet economy, his presence filling the tiny space, yet somehow not encroaching. He unslung a pack, produced a tattered wool blanket, and without a word, laid it near her. Then, he turned his attention to the crumbling fireplace, his movements methodical, scraping together what little dry tinder the shack offered. Ilara watched, numb, the lullaby dead on her lips. Rescue? Or just a different kind of end? He didn't speak, didn't ask, didn't demand. He simply acted. He had kindling, a flint, and soon, a small, courageous flame struggled to life, pushing back the immediate, biting cold. He gestured towards it, a silent invitation. She didn't move. He looked at Finn again, then at her, his expression unyielding but not unkind. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the blizzard, he reached down, his large, calloused hand surprisingly gentle as he scooped a handful of snow into a battered tin cup from his pack, setting it near the nascent fire. His world was one of snow and wind, of silence and survival. Hers had become a dirge. He had stepped through the blizzard, not just into the shack, but into the fragile, desperate orbit of her sorrow, and with that single, decisive act of offering warmth, he pulled her back from the precipice, though neither of them knew what lay beyond the storm. He was Silas, a name she would not learn for days, a man etched from solitude, and he had just irrevocably altered the landscape of his isolation, making a choice whose cost was yet uncounted, bringing the dying child and his mother into the frozen sanctuary of his life. The journey to his cabin was a brutal testament to his strength and her desperation. Silas had wrapped Finn in another layer from his own bedroll, then fashioned a makeshift sling for Ilara, allowing her to carry the child close while he broke trail, sometimes literally carrying her through drifts that threatened to swallow them whole. The wind was a constant, screaming torment, visibility near zero. Yet, he moved with an uncanny certainty, a man intimate with the land's harshest moods. When they finally stumbled through the door of his small, sturdy cabin, it felt like entering a different world. Not warm, not yet, but sheltered, the roar of the blizzard muted to a mournful howl. The cabin was sparse, utilitarian, a stone hearth, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a bed built into the wall, a few shelves holding tins and tools. The scent of pine wood, old smoke, and something animal, leather, perhaps, clung to the air. Silas moved immediately to the hearth, his actions efficient, building a fire with practiced ease. Ilara sank onto the packed dirt floor, exhaustion a leaden weight, Finn a fragile warmth against her. She expected questions, demands, the price for this reluctant charity. None came. He offered her a chipped mug of hot, weak broth, salvaged from his meager supplies, and then retreated to a corner, tending to his snow-caked gear, his back mostly to her. An unspoken agreement settled between them, thick as the wood smoke that began to fill the small space. He provided shelter, she existed within it. Days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light through the single, ice-frosted window and the rhythmic cadence of Silas's chores. He would rise before dawn, tend the fire, check his few animals in the lean-to, chop wood, mend tack. His movements were deliberate, his silence profound. He ate sparingly, leaving the bulk of what little food they had, dried meat, a few withered potatoes, for her. He never looked directly at Finn for long, as if acknowledging the child's precarious hold on life was too much to bear. Ilara, in turn, devoted herself to Finn. The boy, against all odds, still breathed. His fever, which had raged in the line shack, seemed to have broken, though he remained terrifyingly frail. She cleaned him, whispered to him, her voice a low murmur, the only sound she willingly made. When she wasn't tending Finn, she found small ways to contribute to their shared, stark existence. She swept the hearth with a worn broom she found, her movements graceful despite her weariness. She patched a tear in one of Silas's shirts with a needle and thread from her own meager bundle, her stitches small and neat. She did not ask, she simply did. Silas observed her from beneath lowered lids, his initial calculation of her as a burden slowly, almost imperceptibly, shifting. He saw not a defeated waif, but a quiet, fierce resilience. He saw the unwavering devotion in the curve of her back as she bent over the child, the meticulous care in her hands. Pity was a barren emotion. What began to stir in its place was a hesitant curiosity, a dawning respect for the spirit that refused to be extinguished, much like the tiny, stubborn life she nurtured. Communication was a language of gestures, of shared tasks. A nod from him indicated a refilled water bucket. A slight inclination of her head acknowledged a piece of dried apple he left on the table. The silence between them was not empty, but filled with the unspoken, the observed, the slowly changing currents of their strange cohabitation. He was a man locked in a fortress of his own making, she, an exile with nowhere else to go. And in that shared space, under the watchful eye of the lingering winter, something was taking root, as unexpected and fragile as the child's persistent breath. One evening, the fragile truce of Finn's quiet breathing shattered. A rasping cough tore from his tiny chest, followed by a thin, desperate wail that clawed at Ilara's heart. His skin, cool for days, now burned with a terrifying heat. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Ilara's carefully constructed composure. She gathered him close, her whispers frantic, useless against the inferno consuming him. Silas, who had been oiling a piece of harness by the firelight, was on his feet in an instant. The usual stoic mask on his face cracked, revealing a stark concern. He knelt beside her, his large hand surprisingly gentle as he touched Finn's forehead. "Fever," he stated, his voice raspy from disuse, the single word a grim confirmation of her fears. He rose, rummaged through a small wooden chest, and returned with a clay jar containing dried leaves. "Willow bark," he grunted, crushing a small amount into a cup and adding hot water. For the fever Ilara watched, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a desperate, burgeoning hope. He knew something. He was trying. Together, wordlessly, they worked. He showed her how to bathe Finn's small body with snow-melted water, his touch unexpectedly tender as he helped support the limp infant. She coaxed tiny sips of the willow bark infusion between Finn's parched lips. The air in the cabin grew thick with unspoken prayers, with the raw intensity of their shared battle against the encroaching darkness. Hours passed in a blur of hushed movements and anxious waiting. Finally, as the first pale fingers of dawn crept through the frosted window, Finn's breathing eased. The fire in his skin subsided to a mere warmth. He slept, a deep, healing sleep. Exhaustion settled upon Ilara and Silas, a heavy blanket. They sat side by side on the floor, the sleeping child nestled between them. The silence that returned was different now, threaded with the intimacy of shared crisis. Ilara, her voice barely a whisper, finally spoke more than a single, necessary word. "They cast me out," she said, her gaze fixed on the flickering embers. "From Red Creek. They said I was cursed. That fin was it a sin as Silas listened, his expression unreadable in the dim light, but his stillness was an invitation to continue. His father, he wanted nothing to do with us. And the village, they feared what they didn't understand. A single tear traced a path down her soot-stained cheek. I tried to use herbs, the old ways my grandmother taught me, to help the sick. Some got better. Some didn't. When the miller's child died after I gave her a poultice, they blamed me. She didn't look at him, couldn't bear to see the judgment she expected. But Silas merely nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. Fear makes fools of men, he said, his voice low and gravelly. It wasn't absolution, not pity, but a statement of stark, unadorned truth. And in that moment, his understanding, offered without fanfare, forged a bond stronger than any spoken promise. He saw her not as a curse, but as a woman who had fought, and who had, against all odds, saved her child with his reluctant help. His protectiveness, once a general instinct for the vulnerable, now had a name, a face, a story. The first crack in his emotional armor had widened, letting in a sliver of unexpected light. The blizzard eventually relinquished its icy grip, leaving behind a world scoured clean, dazzling under a reluctant sun. The isolation of Silas's cabin, once a fortress, now felt like a fragile bubble. Word, as it always does in sparse lands, began to travel. Perhaps it was a lone trapper who spotted smoke from Silas's chimney when it shouldn't have been there for so long, or Silas himself, forced to journey to a distant, almost forgotten trading post for supplies, his silence misinterpreted. Whispers, like seeds on the wind, found fertile ground in the fearful hearts of Red Creek's townsfolk. They remembered Ilara. They remembered the child of ill omen. The preacher, Josiah Thorne, a man whose piety was matched only by his rigid certainty, fanned the flames of their fear. A woman like that, living with a recluse like Silas? It was an affront to decency, a danger to their community. The old accusations resurfaced, uglier now, twisted by rumor and distance. One crisp morning, as a fragile spring attempted to paint the grey landscape with hints of green, they came. A small delegation from Red Creek, led by Thorne, their faces grim, their eyes hard with judgment. They stood before Silas's cabin, a dark blot against the snow-patched earth. Silas met them at the door, his frame filling the entrance, Ilara a silent shadow behind him, Finn clutched in her arms. "Silas," Thorne began, his voice sanctimonious, "we've come about the woman." And the child at Silas said nothing, his gaze steady, unyielding. "She is not welcome in these parts, Silas. She brought a blight upon our town once. We won't have it again. You must send her away." The other men murmured their agreement, their fear palpable, their prejudice a tangible force. Ilara flinched, but her chin remained high, her eyes fixed on Silas's back. This was it. The moment her fragile sanctuary would shatter. Silas's voice, when it finally came, was low, like the rumble of distant thunder. "She stays," Thorne bristled. "This is not your decision alone to make. She is a danger." An outcast, Silas took a step forward, and the men unconsciously recoiled. His eyes, usually hooded and distant, now blazed with a cold fire. "I've seen danger," he said, his words clipped, each one landing like a hammer blow. "Danger ain't a woman tending her sick child. Danger is men like you, quick to judge, quicker to condemn." He paused, his gaze sweeping over their hostile faces. "She's shown more courage in this wilderness, with nothing but her will to keep that babe alive, than any of you have shown in your comfortable pews. She's worked, she's endured. Her worth ain't for you to measure." He looked back at Ilara then, a fleeting glance that spoke volumes. "This is her home now." With me, the finality in his tone was absolute. Thorne sputtered, but the conviction in the other men wavered. They had come expecting to intimidate a lone, strange man. They found instead an unshakable resolve, a quiet fury that was more potent than any shouted threat. They muttered, consulted, and finally, defeated by his unwavering stand, retreated, their threats dwindling into the vast silence of the wilderness. Ilara watched them go, a tremor running through her. Then she looked at Silas, truly looked at him, and saw not just a protector, but a partner. He had drawn a line in the snow, not just for her, but for them. Their unspoken agreement had been voiced, their bond forged in the crucible of public defiance. The cabin, once a mere shelter, now felt like a fortress they held together. The shadow of Red Creek's judgment receded, but another, more sinister threat, soon emerged from the thawing wilderness. Jonas, the man Ilara had named as Finn's father, a brutish trapper whose brief, cruel interest in her had left scars deeper than flesh, had heard the whispers too. He had not sought her out of remorse, but from a twisted sense of ownership, perhaps believing she had something of value, or simply wanting to reclaim what he saw as his. He arrived like a foul wind, his presence announced by the nervous whicker of Silas's usually calm horse. He was a stark contrast to Silas, loud, arrogant, his eyes holding a predatory gleam. He found Ilara outside, gathering early spring herbs near the wood line, Finn asleep in a sling on her back. "Well, well," Jonas sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "Found yourself a new protector, have you, witch?" Ilara froze, her blood turning to ice. Before she could react, Silas was there, appearing silently from the cabin, a heavy axe resting in his hand, not as a tool, but as a weapon. "She's not yours to trouble," Silas stated, his voice flat, devoid of emotion, yet carrying an undeniable menace. Jonas laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "That brat she carries, it's mine. And she owes me." He lunged, not for Silas, but for Ilara, trying to grab Finn. Silas moved with astonishing speed for a man his size, intercepting Jonas, the axe handle connecting with a sickening thud against Jonas's arm. The man roared in pain and fury, drawing a long, wicked knife. The fight was brutal, desperate. Silas, conditioned by a life of hard labor and solitude, was strong, but Jonas was fueled by a savage rage. They grappled, crashed against the cabin wall, the sounds of their struggle echoing in the unnerving quiet of the wilderness. Ilara, her heart pounding, knew she couldn't just stand by. This wasn't just Silas's fight, it was hers, Finn's. As Jonas momentarily pinned Silas, raising his knife for a killing blow, Ilara acted. Her mind, sharpened by months of hypervigilance and a deep, intuitive connection to her surroundings, recalled a patch of stinging nettles she'd carefully avoided, hidden beneath a nearby clump of old leaves. With a desperate cry to distract Jonas, she lunged, not at him, but at the ground beside him, scooping up a double handful of the fresh, powerfully irritating nettles and dead leaves and flinging them with all her might directly into Jonas's face. He screamed, dropping the knife, clawing at his eyes, the unexpected, agonizing burn overwhelming him. The momentary distraction was all Silas needed. He surged upwards, disarming Jonas with a swift, brutal efficiency, subduing him with a chokehold until the man slumped, gasping and defeated. Silas didn't kill him. He bound Jonas tightly with rope, his face grim. "He won't trouble you again," he said, his breathing heavy. Later, under the cloak of darkness, Silas would take Jonas far from their valley, leaving him with a stark warning and the memory of his defeat. In the aftermath, as an unnerving quiet descended, Ilara checked on Finn, who had miraculously slept through the worst of it. She looked at Silas, his face bruised, his knuckles raw. He had fought for them, bled for them. But she, too, had found a strength she hadn't known she possessed, a ferocity born of a mother's love and a survivor's instinct. Her knowledge, once a source of scorn, had become a weapon, a vital contribution. They had faced the storm, faced the town, and now faced a violent man, and through it all, they had not just survived, but had become something more, forged in the fires of shared peril. They were no longer just protector and protected, they were a unit, reliant on each other's unique strengths, bound by a resilience that had taken root in the harsh, unforgiving soil of their shared lives. In the profound stillness that followed Jonas's departure, a quiet unlike any they had known settled over the small cabin. It was the quiet of safety earned, of a battle won not by one, but by two. Finn slept soundly in his small cradle, a testament to their improbable victory, his breaths even and strong. The fire crackled softly in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the rough-hewn walls, shadows that now seemed to hold a warmth, a sense of belonging. Ilara tended to Silas's wounds, her touch gentle but sure as she cleaned the cuts and bruises with an infusion of herbs she'd gathered. Her hands, usually so deft with mending cloth or coaxing life from the soil, now mended him. He watched her, his gaze direct, unclouded by the usual stoic reserve. The barriers between them, already weathered by shared hardship, seemed to crumble entirely in the wake of the day's violence. There were no words spoken for a long time, only the soft sounds of her tending, his quiet breathing. The emotional tension, stretched taut for so long, finally gave way, not in a torrent, but in a slow, deep release, like a river finding its inevitable course to the sea. When she finished, her fingers lingered for a moment on his bruised hand. He didn't pull away. Instead, his other hand, calloused and strong, came up to cover hers. It wasn't a gesture of passion, but of profound, tender acknowledgement. He looked around the small cabin, his gaze taking in the few, simple signs of her presence: a small pot of wildflowers on the window-sill, a neatly folded blanket on the spare stool, the faint, lingering scent of the herbs she often used. This was no longer just his shelter, it had become their shared space, a home carved out of the wilderness and defiance. His eyes met hers again, and in their depths, she saw an emotion that went beyond gratitude, beyond respect. It was a raw, vulnerable offering. He cleared his throat, the sound rough. "Elara," he said, her name a quiet testament on his lips, perhaps the first time he'd spoken it with such open tenderness. He released her hand and rose, walking to a small, intricately carved wooden box he kept on a high shelf, a box she had never seen him open. From it, he took a small, smooth stone, a river stone worn grey and perfect by time and current. He pressed it into her palm, his fingers closing hers around it. "My mother gave this to me," he said, his voice low, imbued with a lifetime of unspoken feeling. Said it meant the place to stand. A place to stay. He met her gaze, his own unwavering. "This is your place, Elara. Yours and Finn's." Always. It wasn't a declaration of love in the conventional sense, no flowery words or grand pronouncements. It was something deeper, more elemental. An offering of permanence, of a shared future, spoken in his own gruff, sincere language. Elara's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of a profound, overwhelming relief, a sense of having finally, truly, come home. She clutched the stone, its coolness a grounding presence in her hand. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Her acceptance was in the tears that traced paths down her cheeks, in the small, tremulous smile that touched her lips. It was in the way she leaned into him when he hesitantly, almost shyly, put an arm around her shoulders, drawing her close. The storm had passed, both outside and within. In its aftermath, in the quiet sanctuary of their shared survival, a true, reciprocal emotional bond had been irrevocably sealed, not with vows, but with a stone, a touch, and the simple, heartfelt promise of a place to belong. Years passed, seasons turning with the steady rhythm of the mountain wilderness. The small cabin, once a stark outpost of solitude, transformed under Elara's touch and Silas's quiet contentment. A sturdy fence now enclosed a thriving vegetable garden, bright with the colors of beans and squash, and an herb patch that was the envy of any who knew of it. Wildflowers, transplanted from the forest, bloomed in cheerful profusion around the doorstep. Inside, colorful woven mats covered the dirt floor, and curtains, sewn from old flour sacks dyed with berry juice, softened the light at the window. Finn, no longer a fragile infant teetering on the brink, was a sturdy, bright-eyed boy of 5, his laughter echoing in the small clearing, a sound as natural as birdsong. He followed Silas like a shadow, learning the ways of the wilderness, his small hands eager to help with chores, his mind absorbing the quiet wisdom of his adopted father. He adored Elara, listening with rapt attention to her stories, her songs no longer dirges but melodies of joy and resilience. Their life was one of quiet industry and deep, unspoken affection. The harshness of their beginnings had smoothed into a rhythm of shared purpose. Silas, once a man locked in silence, now found his voice in quiet conversations with Elara, in shared smiles over Finn's antics. The deep lines on his face, etched by loneliness and hardship, had softened, his eyes holding a warmth that had once seemed impossible. Elara, the outcast, had found her place, her worth not just seen but cherished. Her knowledge of herbs and healing, once a source of fear and persecution, became a quiet blessing. Trappers and homesteaders from distant valleys, hearing tales of her skill, would occasionally make the arduous journey to their cabin, seeking her help for ailments that stumped ordinary folk. They would leave not just with remedies, but with a sense of awe for the quiet woman who lived in harmony with the wild, and for the stoic man who stood by her side. The community of Red Creek, though still wary, kept its distance, their fear slowly giving way to a grudging respect, then a kind of reverence for the family that had thrived against all odds, a testament to an enduring, quiet love that had blossomed in the most unlikely of places. Their sanctuary, born of a blizzard and a desperate song, was complete, a beacon of peace and resilience in the heart of the wild. And so, their story, like the river stone Silas gave Ilara, became a small, perfect thing, worn smooth by time and trial. A testament to the enduring power of compassion in a world too quick to judge, too slow to understand. Have you ever wondered, when faced with the suffering of another, what small act of courage, what willingness to step into the storm, might change not just one life, but the course of many? What forgotten strengths lie dormant within you, waiting for the right moment, the right person, to call them forth? Perhaps the greatest sanctuaries are not built of stone and wood, but of the quiet, unwavering love that chooses to see worth where others see only outcast. If their journey has touched your heart, if you believe in the power of second chances and the resilience of the human spirit, consider subscribing. For more stories that seek the light in the darkness, and the hope that blooms even in the harshest winter.